So when we started ARC, we had 4 technology platforms: genomic sequencing, robotics, energy storage, and then next generation internet. Brett Winton, our director of research, when we were at AllianceBernstein together, really bringing into our brainstorm on Fridays this thing called Bitcoin. So that really started in 2011. We started ARC in 2014. I guess we had gone through Mt. Gox, and so we said, okay, let's start with next generation internet. And as time went on and we did our research on Bitcoin, and the first paper we wrote was in 2015, and it was in collaboration with Art Laffer. And so I said, Art, I want you to take this paper, Can Bitcoin Serve the 3 Roles of Money? And I want you to tear it apart. Now, Art is known for his fiscal policy expertise, but his mentor was Robert Mundell, who won a Nobel Prize for his monetary theory. And he was very involved in bringing the euro together. So I don't know how people feel about that these days, but nonetheless.
I'm glad we're not part of it.
Yes, there you go. So Art did rip it apart, and which was fantastic. And he came back to us and he said, I've been looking for this ever since we went off the gold exchange standard. He said, it's a rules-based monetary policy, rules-based monetary system. And I said, and he said, I may not agree with the rule, because he was thinking more in terms of inflation. So you'd want a price rule as opposed to store of value, which quantity. He says, but it's okay. It's a rule. And we need to get back to this. And I said to him, Art, how big could this be? And he said, how big is the U.S. monetary base? Now, Bitcoin was $250 at that time. So it was roughly a $6 billion network value or market cap. And I said, he said, how's the monetary? I said, it's $4.5 trillion. He said, there's your answer. I said, really? And I put a lot of money, especially our analyst, Chris Berniski at the time.
Hello, Chris.
So our analyst, who was the one really doing the work on the paper, and hand-selected Yassine, which has made us very happy. But your question again, I lost that.
What was your moment where you realized, which you've explained?
So I don't think I've ever disclosed this before, but I put $100,000 in.
$250.
Yeah.
I don't know how many Bitcoin that is. Is that 400 Bitcoin?
I don't even know. And I wasn't counting at the time. And I've kept it all. But because as soon as he said that, the light bulb went on.
You did that personally or with the fund?
Couldn't do it with the fund because we had to find a security. And so this thing called GBTC, which everybody knows now is Grayscale Coin Investment Trust, that had the 1-year holding period, and they were just cycling through that.
Sorry, this is the rules of your fund. It means you can't
Yes,
buy
ETFs
directly.
can only own securities. Yes. And so we had to find one. And we found Grayscale. Actually, Grayscale was 1 block away from us in Chelsea.
Nice.
And so they opened their books, and we had to go to the New York Stock Exchange. We had to do so much to get Bitcoin in. So we put it in ARKW, our next generation internet fund first. And then we put it into ARK, which is the flagship fund. But and Chris, when he saw me do that, all of a sudden he felt so much more responsible. He did anyway, but 100,000 is, okay, she just did that. And she did it off my research and so forth. So he doubled down as well. It's a great story because, well, it ended well, right?
Yeah. How was my math there?
You were spot on.
Okay, so, and you can still only invest in securities?
In ETFs,
yes.
ETFs,
yeah. And so, therefore, you've invested in companies as well as the Grayscale Trust. How do you feel about the performance of the Grayscale Trust? And do you basically see it as a fire sale?
I do see it as a fire sale. I do ultimately think maybe it's going to take a new administration, but we'll get an SEC commissioner in there who...
Hester Peirce.
Oh, yes. We know Hester, and we're definitely aligned. And I don't know. She would be very controversial. I'd love it. But,
yeah, we would love that.
Yeah, I know. But just as you were saying, the UK, there is going to be regulatory arbitrage, and the US risks, we're already seeing it happen business moving offshore because of our regulatory system. A different administration, and I would say an administration that really cares about making sure innovation is very welcome here from a regulatory point of view, I think will grant Grayscale a conversion to a Bitcoin ETF. And then that gap closes, and that's a nice day. When you have conviction in something as a necessary innovation to help solve some of the world's problems. And I've had, my background is both economics and finance. I feel very confident in what I'm saying. This is the first global, private, meaning no government oversight, digital, rules-based monetary system. I'm explaining it like that. I ask everyone to listen to each of those words. Each one of them is very important. And this is one of the most profound innovations of our time. So my conviction, and it's born out of our research, it's born out of great research that Yassine, Frank, and David are doing now, as well as what Chris has done, and the community largely. So there's no doubt in my mind. And many people think that I'm too confident in not just with Bitcoin, but all of our strategies. We face the same kind of pushback with all of our innovation strategies. This is nothing new. This feels the same. It's a little different to explain, but it's it's not a company, so more finance, but it's a monetary system, which is economics. And I'm comfortable in both of those zones.
Do you see a growing interest again in Bitcoin right now? Are people talking to you a bit more about it just because of what's happening in the economic environment?
We get questions all the time. I think I'd love to hear our take on, excuse me, but crypto broadly.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So, but what we talk about is, in the way I just described Bitcoin, that's the money revolution. And then we have the financial services revolution, DeFi, a little more centralized, and then we have the next generation internet revolution around digital property rights. And I realize all of these are property rights, but when you're talking about the creator economy and the blending of consumption and investment, it's probably even more centralized and in that third bucket. I think when people hear us describe this new world, especially young people, it hits a responsive chord. And the young people are bringing their parents into it. That's an interesting dynamic. That really hasn't happened in my career before. Yes. And they're bringing ARK to their parents as well.
Interesting. What's coming now for ARK? What's the future for ARK? What should we be keeping an eye on?
Oh, we're very excited. I think a lot of people look at ARK and think that we're on the defensive. We are on the offense. And in a couple of ways, we've just launched a crossover public-private venture fund. And it's our first social distribution strategy. So it'll be distributed on something called the Titan app, which is Andreessen Horowitz funded company. And more germane to our conversation here is we're launching 2 new strategies. They're separately managed accounts, so strategies, one focused on cryptocurrencies, and of course, Bitcoin's going to dominate that. Yep. There are going to be very few real currencies. And then the other one is more across crypto assets and the 3 revolutions I mentioned, and it will be actively managed. We think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to add alpha if you're using Bitcoin as your base, or whatever you want as your benchmark, with a crypto asset strategy spanning across the 3 revolutions.
What is the lag here?
So between...
When you would start to expect to see an impact on prices?
We'll see this in the PPI. This is going to get into the PPI very quickly, very quickly. It's already, as I mentioned before, PPI was down. I think we're going to see sequential negatives in many inflation indicators that are more headline. These, of course, are more upstream.
And so do you think this has nothing really then to do with the raising of interest rates?
No, I think we're in a global recession, and that the Fed thinks that we have a 70s style inflationary problem. So it's come November 2nd, it will have increased interest rates 16-fold. Never happened in our history before. Volcker increased them twofold, from 10 to 20%. And a lot of people say, many people dismiss this argument totally. They say, come on, it's such a low base. No, that's the point. We got used to these very low interest rates since 08, 09, and a lot of swaps, and swaps were the problem in the UK, were based on the notion that interest rates wouldn't go up very much if they go up at all. And so I think we're going to see a lot more swap-related turmoil and us out there. It may happen in the US. We know our pension funds aren't as leveraged as the UK pension funds are or have been. So we don't know where the next accident, by definition, we don't know where it's going to be. But I think they raise again, and we'll find another rip in the global financial fabric.